Thank you, Stephen. That was neat. You mentioned your twin sister's birthday, and my mind didn't make that connection until someone said it's your birthday too. You know, even things like that, we need someone to open our eyes to see what's happening. So, with that thought in mind, I'll enter into the scripture reading, which is from Acts chapter 16, 9 through 15. And it sounds like Luke is traveling with Paul and perhaps some of the other disciples and shares this story. It says, during the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him, saying, come over to Macedonia and help us. And when he had seen the vision, we immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in the city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home. And she prevailed upon us. And this is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. So open my eyes. A long, long ago in a place far away, and it was my first year in the ministry, a woman shook my hand after worship and she said, thank you for opening my eyes to see Jesus. Our last pastor never even mentioned Jesus. And I didn't say anything to that. I don't criticize my predecessors, and maybe she just missed church on that Sunday when the pastor mentioned Jesus. Or maybe the pastor just assumed people already came to church thinking about Jesus. Or maybe the other pastor just didn't say Jesus with enough emphasis. But to myself, I wondered, who else is there to talk about on Sunday morning if you don't talk about Jesus? I mean, I mentioned a lot of other people, but always within the context of what Jesus is teaching. And that became one of my first lessons from the pews. You know, pastors learn from you folks. And I learned that you do not assume everybody already knows who I'm talking about on Sunday morning. Mention the name. People come to church hoping and expecting to see Jesus. And so today's lesson from Acts is about opening eyes to see Jesus. And today we get a rare glimpse into the spiritual life of first century faith communities. Paul and his companions journey to Philippi and are there for several days. Philippi was a city in Macedonia, and it became a Roman colony in about 49 BC, which means it would have been governed under Roman rules. And Rome had this rule that only allowed established religions to meet within the city. If your religion existed at the time that Rome took over the city, then you could keep meeting. But since there had been no synagogue in Philippi, Jews worshiping was technically illegal. Jews could not worship in the city. But again, the law only applied to the city, and the Romans were not without hearts. They said, well, just take it outside. Take it outside the city. About a mile outside the city, and nobody would bother you. And so during the several days that Paul is in Philippi and his companions, he would have talked with local people and discovered where the people of God, the Jews, worshiped. Paul says, we went outside the gate by the river. And today, if you look at a map or go to the city, you can still see an outline of where the ancient walls once stood. And you can see that looking at ancient maps, you discover that a road crossed the river about 1 mile outside the gates of the city. So that's probably where Paul met with the women. Verse 13, there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. And this is not a very astounding statement today, but back then it spoke loud and clear about Jesus' mission to open the church to all people, men and women, and how Jesus wanted to now pull the communities together. In a day when worship was segregated, men were over here, women were over there. This is a women's prayer fellowship, which is what makes it a rare glimpse into that time. In the Bible and in history, we hear a lot about men worshiping, but very little about women. Paul shows up, maybe by invitation. Says we sat down and we spoke to the women. Recall how scandalous it was when Jesus was caught out in a public place speaking to a Samaritan woman drawing water from a well. It's time to bring people together, to jump over the boundaries. The author writes, we sat down and we spoke. Verse 14 says, Lydia was a worshiper of God, meaning she had practiced faith as a believer in God, as a Jewish believer in God. But this is probably the first time she's hearing about a man named Jesus. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. Her heart, her spiritual eyes were open to see Jesus. Eye-opening experiences are things I hope to gain whenever I head out in the world on my various journeys. Even when I'm on vacation, I'm trying to work my intellect, and I'm looking to learn things. I like to have my eyes open. I go out in the world to see things, and I challenge myself to try and see Jesus in a new way. And one year, it wasn't vacation, but I was on sabbatical. And a sabbatical is when you have kind of an intended purpose. And my intended purpose was to learn something about homeless people. And I had the opportunity to visit with my friends in Pasadena, California. And my friends Chris and Denny, you've heard about them before. And during that time, I had my eyes open to a reality we call homeless. Chris was a medical doctor. She retired, but in her retirement, she gave time to working in a free clinic in a place we know sometimes as Skid Row down in LA. So she spent several years working among the homeless. And that experience gave her an up-close and personal understanding of the homeless. And I learned at least 4 lessons from her in that year. Lesson began the first night. It was unexpected. I was out with my friends. We attended a guitar concert, and we were on our way home about 11 p.m. They stopped the car to fill up the gas tank. And next to the filling station was a McDonald's restaurant. And Chris said, I sure would like some chicken strips. I said, well, while you're filling up the tank, I'll run over and grab some chicken strips. So it's 11 p.m. at night, and this McDonald's had a drive-through window and a walk-up window. So I walked up to the walk-up window, and I said, I'd like some chicken strips. And the kid at the window said, we won't serve you here. We won't serve you here. And I just stood there for a while, and I was kind of insistent. The manager came up and said, where's your car? Apparently you don't go to a McDonald's restaurant at 11 o'clock without a car. I just want some chicken strips, I said. And where's your car? I said, my friends are at the filling station filling the tank. And then the staff started laughing at me. Honestly, this is what happened. Apparently people walking in, it's not what you do. And then someone says, go to the back door. We'll give you something. Well, it's starting to get clear to me, but I'm not really understanding. I'm not going to go to the back door. I don't need a handout. That seems so strange. I walked back to Chris and Denny without the chicken back in the car. Chris says, were they closed? And I told her the story. And she said, well, they must have thought you were a homeless man. And so we drove to the Wendy's across the street. Lesson number 1, homeless means being treated different from other people. A few days later, I was strolling down a beach in Ventura, California, and I saw a man wearing tattered military clothing. He had this worn-out coat, a wool cap, fingerless gloves at the middle of the summer, you know, like you see in the movies. And he was a big man. He was hovering over this large garbage can, and then I watched him, and I saw him reach into the garbage can and pull out some food and eat the food. And I said, I can do something about this. I had $5 bills in my pocket just for such a circumstance like this. And I started walking toward the man, and he sees me, and literally he starts to snarl at me. And look in his eyes tells me to keep my distance. And again, I'm confused, so I go back to Chris, and I tell her what happens, and she says, he probably saw you as competition. Do I really look like a homeless guy? Lesson 2. Being homeless means living by a different set of rules. Street rules, we might call them. I said to my friend Chris, you seem to know a lot about homeless people. Tell me more. And she shared things that added to the difficulty of being a doctor. For example, Chris told me about a man she was struggling to keep alive. He was a diabetic and he was living on the street. And she had to see him almost daily in order to give him a needle, the needles he needed to inject the insulin. And so often she would drive into the city on her days off just to give this man needles to inject the insulin. And I wondered why. She said, some people, they try to watch out for him. People know about his condition. Some friends try to look out for him, but often drug users would shake him down and steal the needles so they could inject their drugs. So he needed it every day. Lesson number 3, homeless is a community much like any other community. Variety of people, good people, bad people, indifferent, some angels, some devils. At that point, Denny chimed in. He said, well, homeless isn't just in places called Skid Row. He pointed to the cross, he pointed to the cross in a special way. He pointed to the park across the street from their upscale Pasadena home. And he said, you wouldn't know it, but there's a middle-aged couple lives in the hedges right across the street. They're a nice couple. They never bother anybody. In fact, I like having them around because they keep an eye on the neighborhood. Lesson number 4, I learned homeless is invisible. Invisible until someone opens up your eyes and helps you to see. In this way, I'm a little like Lydia in today's story. I knew homeless people exist, like Lydia knew God existed. She was at the river praying with others, but she still needed a teacher to help her see what to some might seem obvious. They were told about Jesus as the women prayed in the river, and Jesus worked the miracle and opened her heart to see him. And the church exists for this reason, to tell the story so that others can discover what Lydia had found that day by the river. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. Lydia met Jesus. And so changed was Lydia by the gospel story that it says she and her household were baptized. Her household, Lydia was a leader in the community, wealthy businesswoman, we think. And her household meant anyone within her circle of influence. Her children were baptized. Her grandchildren were baptized. Her servants' children were baptized. Old Uncle Fred, who dropped in a few years ago and hasn't left yet, he got baptized. Anyone within her household got baptized. And at that point, Lydia takes on the responsibility to continue to see to their spiritual nurture. By teaching and by example, she would make sure they heard the story and prayed that Jesus would open their hearts. And I want to enter into time of prayer this Sunday morning. And let's lift up